The ground shook before I even heard the sound. Dust rose from the ridgeline like the whole hill was breathing. I gripped my rifle and pressed my back against the rock, counting my own heartbeat because it was the only thing I trusted to stay steady. My name is Daniel Whitmore, and 3 hours ago I was told that the machines coming toward us had never lost a single battle in 1,000 years. I did not believe it, not because I was brave. I did not believe it because believing it meant giving up before the fight even started, and giving up was not something my mother raised me to do. The first machine came over the ridge like a mountain learning to walk. It stood taller than any building in our colony, its metal body catching the weak light of our sun and turning it into something cold and sharp. Its legs moved in perfect rhythm, 4 of them, each step crushing rock into powder. On its shoulders sat weapons that glowed with a soft blue light, humming with a promise I did not want to hear. Behind me, my squad waited. Laura Simmons was on my left, checking her scope for the 10th time. Kevin Marsh was on my right, quiet, jaw tight. Behind us, dug into the trench line, 40 more Marines waited with me, all of us staring at something that should not have been possible. Command had shown us the reports. Every world that fought these machines had fallen within a day. Some fell within an hour. The machines were called Dreadwalkers by the survivors of other worlds, and the name had traveled across the stars faster than any warning ever could. I looked at Laura. She looked back at me and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. We had trained for this. We had studied every scrap of data pulled from wreckage of other fallen worlds. We knew the machines could predict movement, calculate trajectories, and adjust their armor faster than any human eye could track. We knew they had never faced an enemy that refused to follow a pattern. That was the one thing Command kept repeating to us before the drop. The machines fight by prediction. They do not fight by imagination. And humans, whatever else we are, have never once in our history fought the same way twice. The Dreadwalker stopped at the top of the ridge. For a moment it just stood there, scanning, and I felt like an insect under a light too bright to hide from. Then it fired. The blast tore through the ridge to our left, throwing rock and dirt into the sky. My ears rang. Someone shouted a position. I did not have time to be afraid, because fear was a luxury for people with time to spare, and I had none. I raised my rifle, but I did not fire yet. My orders were clear. Wait, let it come closer. Let it think we are afraid. We were afraid, but we were also patient, and patience was something no machine could ever be programmed to understand about us. The Dreadwalker took another step, and another, moving down the ridge toward our trench line. Its weapons tracked left, then right, searching for a clear shot. It moved like something certain of its own victory, like a chess player who had already seen every move we could make. But we were not playing chess. We were playing something it had never seen before. Kevin gave the signal. 3 flares shot into the sky at once, and for half a second the machine's sensors locked onto the light instead of us. That half second was all we needed. Marcus Doyle, dug into a hole 30 meters ahead of the trench, fired the first shot. It was not a plasma round or an energy weapon. It was old-fashioned metal, a solid slug moving faster than sound, aimed at a small gap in the machine's leg joint that our engineers had found buried in old wreckage data. The Dreadwalker's armor could stop almost anything, but it was not built to expect something so simple, so blunt, so human. The leg buckled, the machine stumbled, and for the first time since it appeared on that ridge, it looked less like a mountain and more like something that could fall. The whole trench opened fire at once. I fired too, aiming for the same joint, watching sparks fly where metal met metal in ways it was never designed to. The machine roared, a sound like grinding stone, and swung its main weapon toward Marcus's position. I did not think. I ran. I do not remember deciding to move. I remember being in the trench and then being outside it, sprinting across open ground toward Marcus's hole, while the machine's targeting light swept the field like a search beam looking for something small enough to matter. Laura covered me. I heard her shots ring out behind me, drawing the machine's attention just long enough. I reached Marcus and pulled him back as the ground where he had been kneeling turned into a smoking crater. We rolled into a shallow ditch together, breathing hard, ears ringing, the world around us shaking with every step the wounded machine took as it tried to steady itself. That was when I understood something. The machine was not afraid, because machines do not feel fear, but it was confused. Its perfect calculations had told it that no enemy would run toward danger to save another. It had not accounted for that. It had never needed to before. Kevin's voice came through my earpiece, steady despite everything. Second wave incoming. 2 more Dreadwalkers on approach from the east ridge. I looked at Marcus. His leg was bleeding, but he could still move, still fight. I helped him up and we made our way back toward the trench, keeping low, keeping quiet, watching the sky for any sign of what was coming next. The first Dreadwalker, the wounded one, was pulling back, its systems likely recalculating, likely sending data to the others about what had just happened. I did not know exactly how their communication worked, but I imagined it now understood one simple fact. Humans did not fight the way its makers expected. We reached the trench just as the second wave crested the ridge. 2 more machines, taller than the first, their armor darker, their weapons larger. Behind them, smaller units moved in formation, quick and agile, built for chasing down anything that tried to run. This was the moment Command had warned us about. The moment when most other species, according to the old records, simply broke and scattered. The moment when hope usually died. I looked down the trench line at my squad. Nobody was running. Nobody was breaking. Laura was reloading. Kevin was watching the ridge with narrowed eyes. Marcus, wounded and pale, was already lifting his rifle again. I realized then that the machines were not the only ones who had studied their enemy. We had studied them too. Every scrap of wreckage, every recording, every failed defense from every fallen world had been studied by our engineers and our officers for months before we ever set foot on this ridge. We knew their blind spots. We knew their timing. We knew that their perfect predictions needed patterns to work from, and we had trained ourselves to have none. The 2 new Dreadwalkers advanced with their support units spreading out on either side. Our trench held its fire this time, waiting, letting the smaller units get close enough that the big machines could not fire without risking hitting their own side. It worked. The support units moved into range, and our anti-armor teams, hidden in reinforced positions we had spent the whole night digging, opened fire on the smaller machines first. They fell fast, their thinner armor no match for concentrated fire, and their wreckage became obstacles that slowed the larger machines down. One of the 2 remaining Dreadwalkers tried to step over a fallen unit and misjudged the angle. It stumbled, just slightly, just enough. Our second anti-armor team fired at the exposed underside of its foot, and the leg gave out entirely this time. The machine crashed down onto the ridge with a sound that shook dust loose from every rock around us. The crowd of Marines around me did not cheer. There was no time for that. The second Dreadwalker, seeing its companion fall, adjusted its tactics immediately, spreading its fire wider, faster, more erratic in an attempt to break whatever pattern we were using against it. That was when things became truly difficult, because a machine that stops predicting and starts adapting becomes a different kind of enemy entirely. It caught 2 of our own team in the open. I saw Grace Millar go down, and I felt something cold twist in my chest, but I could not stop, because stopping meant more of us would fall. Kevin dragged her back behind a rock while the rest of us kept firing, kept moving, kept refusing to give the machine anything steady enough to lock onto. I remember running low along the trench line, past faces I had trained with for months, faces now tight with focus instead of fear. I remember Laura shouting coordinates for a flanking position. I remember the smell of burnt metal and turned earth, and the strange calm that settles over a person when there is simply too much happening to feel anything but the next second in front of them. The final Dreadwalker, the one still standing, turned its full attention toward the center of our line, clearly identifying it as the source of the most coordinated resistance. It began to advance with slow, deliberate steps, its weapons charging with a hum that grew louder with every second. This was the machine Command had warned us about the most, the flagship unit, the one carrying the most advanced systems, the one that had personally led the destruction of at least 6 other worlds before ours. Our scouts had given it a designation. We called it the Iron Crown, because of the ring of sensors circling the top of its frame like a jagged halo. The Iron Crown's main weapon fired, and the blast tore through our forward trench, throwing several of my squad backward. I felt the heat of it even from where I stood, and for one terrible moment I thought the line would break. It did not break. Kevin was already calling new positions. Laura was already moving to cover the gap. Marcus, wounded leg and all, was crawling toward a fallen support unit's disabled cannon, one that our engineers had studied and knew how to fire manually, if the timing was right. I ran to help him. Together we hauled the heavy weapon into position, our hands shaking from adrenaline, our breath ragged from smoke and dust. Marcus lined up the shot while I fed the ammunition feed by hand, watching the timer count down on the side of the weapon that told us exactly how long we had before the Iron Crown's main cannon would be ready to fire again. 3 seconds. Marcus fired. The shot struck the Iron Crown directly in the ring of sensors on its head, the one weak point our engineers had identified after months of studying wreckage from other worlds. Sparks flew, and the machine's steady advance faltered for just a moment, its perfect calculations thrown into confusion by damage it had never expected an enemy to know how to cause. That moment was all we needed. Every remaining Marine on the line opened fire at once, concentrating everything we had on the same weakened point. I fired until my rifle ran hot in my hands. Laura fired beside me, her aim steady despite the chaos. Kevin directed fire from the flank, keeping the machine from turning its main weapon toward any single position long enough to fire again. The Iron Crown staggered. Its legs buckled beneath it, one after another, until finally, with a sound like a falling tower of steel, it came down onto the ridge and did not rise again. For a long moment, nobody moved. The dust settled slowly around the fallen machine, and the silence after so much noise felt strange, almost unnatural, pressing against my ears like something physical. Then, from somewhere down the trench, someone let out a breath that turned into something like a laugh, and the sound spread through the line, quiet but real, the kind of relief that comes only after facing something you were not sure you would survive. I looked around at my squad. Laura was helping Grace, who was hurt but alive, already being carried toward the medical tent behind our lines. Kevin was checking on Marcus, whose leg wound had been made worse by the effort of firing that final weapon, but who was grinning despite the pain. I realized I was smiling too, though I could not remember deciding to. We had done what no other world, according to every record we had studied, had ever managed to do. We had stopped the Dreadwalkers. Not through better weapons, not through more advanced technology, but through something simpler. We had refused to fight the way they expected us to. Command's voice came through the radio a moment later, calm and steady despite everything. All units, hold position. Additional forces inbound. Confirm status of enemy advance. Kevin answered for us, his voice hoarse but proud. Enemy advance halted. 3 units down. Requesting medical support for wounded. There was a pause on the line, longer than usual, before Command responded again. Understood. Well done, Marines. Well done. I sat down against the trench wall, my legs finally giving out now that the danger had passed, and let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From something else. Something closer to disbelief mixed with a strange kind of pride. Later that night, as our engineers moved out to examine the fallen machines, I walked the ridge where the Iron Crown had fallen. Up close, it was even larger than it had looked during the fight, its armor scarred and blackened, its sensors dark and lifeless. I placed my hand against its cold metal side, and thought about everything it represented. 1,000 years of victories, 1,000 years of worlds that had fallen before it. Worlds whose people had probably stood exactly where I stood now, staring up at something they believed could not be stopped. We had stopped it, not because we were stronger, not because our weapons were better. We had stopped it because we had never learned to give up, and because that single stubborn refusal turned out to be something no machine, however perfect its calculations, had ever been built to fight against. Laura found me there a few minutes later, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her face streaked with dirt but calm now, the tension of the battle finally draining away. She stood beside me and looked up at the fallen machine without saying anything for a while. Finally she spoke. They really thought this would be easy. I nodded. I imagine every world they conquered thought the same thing about themselves, right up until it wasn't easy anymore. She smiled slightly at that, tired but genuine. Guess we're the ones who get to write that part differently. We stood there together a while longer, looking out over the ridge at the wreckage scattered across the battlefield, at the quiet aftermath of something that would be remembered for a very long time. Not just by us, but by whoever else these machines had once frightened into believing they could never be beaten. Word of what happened on our ridge spread faster than any of us expected. Within days, other colonies under threat began requesting the data our engineers had gathered, the patterns we had discovered, the weaknesses we had found. What started as one desperate stand became something larger, a shared understanding passed from world to world, proof that the Dreadwalkers were not invincible after all. I do not know how the rest of this war will unfold. I do not know how many more battles we will have to fight, or how many more machines like the Iron Crown are still out there, marching toward worlds that have not yet learned what we learned on that ridge. But I know this. Whatever comes next, it will not be met with the same fear that greeted the Dreadwalkers on every world before ours. Because now they know something they never expected to learn. They built machines that could predict any pattern, calculate any outcome, and overcome any strategy built on logic and repetition. They just never accounted for an enemy who refused, on principle, to ever fight the same way twice. And on a quiet ridge, beneath a sky still hazy with dust and smoke, that single difference was enough to change everything.